This fourth election round in Israel comes just after 6 months or so after the Abraham Accords were signed, under which Israel normalized relations with the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, with Prime Minister Netanyahu promising that more agreements are lined up. Since then, the White House has a new president, President Joe Biden, and now Netanyahu's leadership is at stake again. For more on that, we're now joined by Abdullah El-Janid. He's a Bahraini columnist and political analyst who joins us from Manama in Bahrain. Thank you so much for being with us today. And Yasmin Hassouni, she's a North Africa affairs specialist and a board member at the Institute of Saharan Studies in Casablanca in Morocco. And here in studio, Nirit Ophir, Dr. Nirit Ophir. She's a researcher at the Esri Center for Gulf Studies at the University of Haifa. Thank you very much for coming into our studio today. I'd like to start with you, Ms. Hasnawi, and ask you about what we could expect from the continuation of relationships between Israel and Morocco under a potential change of government. I guess if Netanyahu stays in power, then it's clear for everybody, although Biden is now in the White House and has replaced Trump, there is an agenda already that both countries have established. The train has already left the station, as we were to say. What if there is a change in governance here?
So I think, first of all, that the Israeli elections, it's very important to note that the Israeli elections matter to North Africa, more specifically the Gulf and the wider Middle East. Now, concerning Morocco, I think that Moroccans are more interested to see how Israel as a state will continue to develop its relations with the Arab world. And what the Moroccans would like to see is the continuity of these peace initiatives, whether it's with Likud or Yesh Atid or any other political party which will come to power. So the Moroccan people view the recent Abraham Accords initiative with Israel as a breakthrough. So the Moroccans were very happy that, Netanyahu made that, I'm not going to say that deal, but rather that accord, the resumption of relations, because we didn't have normalization, but rather resumptions of relations. So, and also from what I read, I think that even some political parties that are running, with or against Netanyahu, they agree on those accords because they see that it's high time that, that the Arab world needs to communicate with Israel to either, boost the economy, specifically after this pandemic that hits the world, and also find a solution to that, long-standing conflicts, with Israel and the Palestinians. So it's not about whether Netanyahu or any other political parties that will win. It's rather about the security, the safety, and also the economic well-being of the whole region. Now, regarding the Biden administration, I think that the Biden administration now, its priority is not on the Middle East or what is happening in the Arab world. This is not really its priority right now. When Biden came to power, he talked more about the climate change, the deal with climate change, the trade war with China, and whatever comes, he says that it will happen only after the elections, of Israel, and after the elections also with Iran.
Well, if you wait until after the elections in Israel, you could wait many times and for a long time, because it's already our fourth election round in less than 2 years, as you all know. Mr. El-Janid, I do want to get your perspective on things. It's a new friendship between Israel and Bahrain, at least on record. How is the election perceived in Bahrain? I'm sure it's viewed as a very unstable country.
Well, I hope you get it done and over with this time, or this round, because all of us are getting fatigued or waiting for a majority government or a government that could form and stay in power, because we all looking forward to address few issues related to bilateral relation and also regional issues. So the sooner that you get over this, it's going to be better for everybody else. And this is, I believe, how we feel here in Bahrain.
So, it's a good time to mention that Prime Minister Netanyahu did want to go. He wanted to go to the UAE just before the elections, perhaps to show off with his achievements, some would say. And the UAE decided that he's not welcome there, making sure that they won't interfere with the local elections here. We can see what they posted. They said, from the UAE's perspective, the purpose of the Abrahamic Accords is to provide a robust strategic foundation to foster peace and prosperity with the state of Israel and in the wider region. The UAE will not be a part in any internal electioneering in Israel now or ever. That was the announcement of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I want to ask you, Dr. Nirit Ofir, was it a surprise to you that they didn't want to welcome Netanyahu after all the joint efforts of the last few months? You would have expected that they would have perhaps stood by him.
First of all, I would like to say Mas al-Khir and Wassalamu alaikum to our amazing guest. This is, for me, an amazing opportunity to introduce and to meet people from Bahrain and also in Morocco. I lived in Morocco in 2015, which it was a beautiful period for me. And yes, there is a huge gap between what Israelis see and what the UAEs or all other the countries in the Middle East see Israel and the elections. First of all, it's different. Israel is something else in the Middle East. It's a different kind of island with processes and interferes between sectors that not allowed and we can see in other countries. And this is really important because people and nations are making peace with countries, not with a minister. And in our elections, we can see, as we mentioned here, that it happens every 6 months lately. And unfortunately, I think, in my opinion, that it won't be changed in the next maybe 3-4 years, because there are some, as we know, processes here in Israel that won't work in different way. So it's very important to understand that we are talking and discuss about nations and not people. But we have to mention Bibi Netanyahu that did a huge process, something that we didn't see before. We know that everybody knows that in the past 20 decades, we have interfered, we have kind of relations out of the ground with nations from the UAE and with the Gulf countries, all over the countries, even with Morocco, as we know, but now it's formal. And this is a huge difference too. So everybody are waiting. Everybody want to see what is going on, who will be the next. Maybe it will be Bibi Netanyahu. I think, again, that countries from the Gulf and all over the Middle East are looking for make peace with country, not with a person.
Okay. This election is very much about yes Netanyahu or no Netanyahu when it comes to the Israeli people.
Indeed.
Very few issues are really discussed openly on the table, economic issues or the Palestinian issue. Let's take a listen as to what the Palestinian leadership had to say today about this fourth election round here in Israel.
Though we consider these elections an internal affair, all their electoral campaigns were at the expense of our land and our people, and parties are competing over more land, more settlements, and therefore we condemn these franchised campaigns against our lands and sacred sites, and we call upon the world to intervene to stop these measures.
We do not accept anything good from these elections because it's apparent that the competition is between the right wing and the extreme right wing. They are all from the right wing, and all the parties, even those opposing Netanyahu, reject the creation of an independent Palestinian nation, reject that the Palestinians have Jerusalem as their capital, and most of the Zionist parties, if not all of them, reject the idea of a solution that will create peace in the region.
Mr. El-Janid, I want to pick up with you in Bahrain. Do you think that an unstable Israel, or Israel with such a narrow coalition, whether it will be Netanyahu or his opponents, it's going to be a very narrow coalition on either side. Do you think they're capable at this moment in time, after the Abraham Accords, to come into some sort of deal with the Palestinians to finally solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I believe what Nurit the CDU said, your guest doctor said, was very clear and very critical. If we're going to continue and develop all issues related to the joint security of this region, we will definitely need to, see it from the perspective of nation of this region trying to agree on solving a lot of outstanding issues. The Palestinians issue will have to be tackled. But again, this could be a catalyst that could help if the Palestinians are willing to invest as much as we have invested. If they decided otherwise, it's going to up to them to be, isolated. Israel is dreaming or demanding further recognition by other, countries like Saudi Arabia and everything. So we all need to come around with certain practical compromises to bridge all those gaps. This is how to build the future.
Yasmin Hasnawi, are Morocco and other counterparts from the Arab and Muslim world putting pressure on Israel at this point after the agreements they have signed to conclude deals with the Palestinians?
Well, I think that when Morocco resumed relations with Israel, the King of Morocco was very clear that, he will be committed to a two-state solution following the United Nations resolution. What Morocco has been doing, even before the resumption of relations, Morocco has been considered as a very important channel of communication with the Israeli and Palestinians for many years. So Morocco is committed to the two-state solution, but I think that even if with the new government is elected, I think that it's not going to change. The status is not going to change because there will always be division on Jerusalem status and the right to return. So I think that finding a solution with the Israeli and Palestinian has to come not only from Israel and not only from Palestinian, but the Arab countries needs to step up to the plate and needs also to communicate with Israel. So I think that the Abraham Accords, I believe that they are very important to that peace process, and I think that the other countries need to join the deal or the resumption of relations that was made by Netanyahu.
Dr. Nirit Ophir, back to you. The Palestinians have said that many Arab countries who signed these accords with Israel have turned their back at the Palestinians. What's your take on that?
Well, we have two issues with the Palestinians. First of all, we can see that the Palestinian authorities inside themselves, they are divided now more than ever. They are not like used to be, and it's quite a problem, quite a mushkila, as we say in Arabic, but it's a very important issue to understand that without the Palestinian authorities, without the Palestinian citizens, we can't proceed. They're a very huge and a very big issue, even if nowadays they are not mentioned as before. Nowadays we have kind of situations that everybody talk about Ibrahim peace and processes and what we are going to do around the world. But the main target is to bring everybody together to the table and make it as well.
Okay. Dr. Nirit Ophir here in studio. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yasmin Hasnawi in Casablanca in Morocco and Abdullah Al-Janid in Manama in Bahrain. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.